Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations. I think this is going to be number 34. It's either going to be 34 or 33, depending on what happens this weekend. I'm your host, Joe Hannon, Joe from Jersey, Joe from Princeton Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I'm joined here today with Erica Zendell, who is a phenomenal writer and grappler in her own right. Erica is one of the coolest people I've met on the internet. And I've been meaning to talk to her on this podcast for a long time just about the intersection of jiu-jitsu and life, because she's a very thoughtful human being, a very skilled grappler, and someone who brings a lot of presence to both of those domains. And I reached out to her a couple weeks ago and said, hey, what would you want to talk about? And we had this exchange briefly through text about, in some ways, about the aging process on the mats, in other ways about managing expectations relative to aging, relative to our performance. And I thought that would be fruitful material for a discussion here on the podcast today. So, Erica, welcome to the podcast. Maybe for those of you who don't know you, maybe you should just talk a little bit about yourself and what brought you to jiu-jitsu and what brought you to the creative life.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me, Joe. I think the last time that we connected might have been at my 10th college reunion, after which point we had been conversing on the internet for a little bit of time. But yeah, I think it's about a year later, so it's good to catch you face to face, even if not in person. A little bit about me. My name's Erica Zendell. I am also born and raised in New Jersey. I still identify as a Jersey girl, but I currently live in Metro Atlanta in Marietta, Georgia. I train out of Atos, Atlanta under Bruto Frizzato, but I got my start in jiu-jitsu back in 2017 in South Boston, Massachusetts, and went from white to purple under John Clark, who's a stalwart in the jiu-jitsu and MMA community in New England. As for what brought me to jiu-jitsu, I'd say a broken heart and a few good friends. I had graduated from MIT with my MBA in 2016, and after that, launched into what would become, my full-time career in the tech world. It was a bit of a rocky transition. Prior to that, I'd gone to Princeton for undergrad. I had, racked up a lot of, good degrees, a lot of pedigree, and then you kind of think if you follow a certain path and build your resume a certain way, your life will, you'll wake up, for the women who listen to this, like Jennifer Garner and 13 going on 30, flirty and thriving. And that was not me, circa 2020. But I guess back to 2016, 2017, how I got into jiu-jitsu was I was in this job, wasn't super happy. The guy that I thought was the love of my life broke up with me before Cyber Monday, and I worked at Wayfair at the time, so that was going to be a pretty long work day. And I spent the next 6 months or so trying to get my swagger back. Friends who cared about me were like, you need a hobby, dating doesn't count. And I had a colleague from a previous job who had been, kind of sedentary, out of shape for as long as I'd known her. I had her over for dinner one night in March of 2017. Suddenly she was running marathons, powerlifting, had broken off the a 9-year engagement and relationship with her fiance at the time, which hadn't been a good relationship for her. And around when I'd had dinner with her, a friend of mine from grad school had been encouraging me, hey, I did Muay Thai over the summer before I started my full-time job. I'm starting to try jiu-jitsu. You should come. And he badgered me quite a few times to come in. So the inability to have boundaries at work and general career dissatisfaction after a pretty gilded rise to what success should look like, combined with a broken heart and friends encouraging me to try something new that would break me out of the pretty dimensionless work and, frankly, dating life that I was living in, was what brought me to jiu-jitsu. The first day I trained was March 22nd, 2017, and it was love at first choke, and I've been training ever since.
It's interesting to me how many people come to jiu-jitsu from this deep place of wounding. It could either be the loss of, a significant other, or I know someone who had recently lost his wife, actually, and started training. And I don't know. I find that the more I get to know people, the more everybody seems to have some deep kind of ache or pain that brought them in the first place. And maybe they can't quite articulate it, but like if you ask them enough questions, like you kind of get down to the heart of the matter, and there's literally a wounded heart in there somewhere. And it's amazing that something so painful can be so healing at the same time.
Yeah, it's I think people told me this later. When I came in, they thought a few things about me. The first was that, I was fat. Not untrue. I was something like 20, 25 pounds heavier than what I currently am. Two was that I was domestically abused, was the suspected why I came in to train.
Wow.
That's the wound that people thought I'd been carrying. And the third was, that I wouldn't be back for a second class. So they were wrong about that one.
Yeah, they got that wrong.
In terms of the domestic abuse, nothing purely verbal, nothing physical. My dad was a pretty hard grinding guy, self-employed lawyer. So you can get into that layer of kind of wounding and never being able to win an argument in the household and wanting to win in other areas of life. But that may or may not take you down the road you want to lead the conversation. But I'm happy to
look,
dig in.
there are no roads in mind. I really, this is the first one of these that I'm doing, and ultimately my goal is to kind of just let the conversation have a life of its own. Have a very light touch in terms of where it goes. But your point about your relationship with your father is an interesting one, especially relative to something you said specifically about realized and unrealized potential. When you're living in an environment where you feel like you can never win an argument, that's going to put a bit of pressure on you to win, to achieve, to rack up, achievements. I'm wondering how you relate to how that observation relates, how that relates to you, and I guess how that relates to jiu-jitsu and what you're doing on the mat.
I'll be the first to say that I would not be who I am without my father, and that is both a wonderful and a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Going back to what I said before, my dad passed away in 2020. In addition to turning 30, pandemic hits is when my dad passed away. It's been 3 years, and I think that loss kind of prompted this reflection of what of my own life have I kind of created for myself and what was created for other people. Whether it was, being an undergrad in Princeton and certain forms of, success or achievement being valued, or what my dad wanted for my life. I think he would have been very happy to see me be the standard tri-state Jewish doctor, a lawyer, investment manager, things that are considered, country club respectable kind of thing. Or famous, but that one I think is harder than perhaps the rest. But in terms of, I guess, winning, I think my dad made me very, stubborn and resilient, because the fact that I could not beat him in an argument always forced me to kind of work harder and figure out my angles. If I was going to pick a fight about something, even if I never brought it up to him, I would think, he always forced me to think 1 or 2 steps ahead of, if I say this, how does this, play out, 2 steps down the road. If I'm kind of a weighing of options and paths forward, which I think is somewhat applicable to jiu-jitsu, it definitely hits in my job of, if I, dig into this, what are the implications of involving this person, of spending more money to buy a certain product, or service. I think that's true for jiu-jitsu too. If I go one way and the person reacts, great, I get my A plan. If they react in the other way, I have to go with a B plan. And even if I get my A plan, what are, the decision trees or potential options that I have to continue to progress and advance, some of which I get to kind of define and drive on my own, but I can't completely discount or not be mindful of how the other person might react. And I think the most dangerous thing with my dad was he was unpredictable. in a lot of ways. So it was also a lesson in no matter how well you plan, you can't really predict what is going to happen. You can do your best to prepare. You can think it through. But you have to be prepared to also expect the unexpected. And I think that applies a lot to competition. Like, you can review footage on everyone in your bracket, but that footage is only good on that day for how that person performed doing something. It could have been like years ago. You don't know what they've been working on. You don't know how their training has changed up. You don't know what their preparation looks like either. So you do the best with the tools you have. You think critically about it. You make the most of, what you can control, and prepare yourself for every potential facet that you can identify. So I guess that's how I would tie in, at least, maybe not so much like winning, but an approach towards like addressing a competition situation, or even just coming to the mat of what kind of all the work that happens before you even step on, in terms of, and getting the most out of the experience, whether it's in a competition or even in a given day of training. The more prep work you do, the more you're probably going to get out of it. But I could go in and say, I'm going to work triangles, but the entire class and the entire round are like specifics where you're starting on top. And it's going to be harder to get that unless I'm consistently getting to mount on everyone and able to do a mount, things like that. Mm-hmm. So,
you mentioned that there was kind of like a bit of a switch that got flipped when you made this transition into jiu-jitsu, where you were examining your life a bit more closely and figuring out what's important to you versus what's important to other people. What specifically about the art was revelatory in that capacity? Was it just that it unlocked something in you, or like what was going on there?
Yeah. Some timelining might be a little bit helpful for that too. Just the evolution of my relationship with jiu-jitsu, because I think who I was in 2017 versus who I was in 2020 versus who I am in 2023 are pretty different in terms of what has been unlocked when. I think when I started jiu-jitsu 2017, I had the typical white belt, starry-eyed, this is amazing. It was helping me lose the weight that I had been carrying, both physically and probably spiritually at the time. It gave me confidence in my own stubbornness and resilience and I trained at a gym that was mostly a lot of large dudes. There was a women's class and there were a handful of women at the white belt ranks, a few at the colored belts, but I think survival in my old gym was very contingent on how willing are you to be smashed by someone bigger than you and just keep grinding. Or maybe that's just how I kind of see it in hindsight. The kind of reflections on success happened more about 3 years in, when the pandemic hit, and the chip on my shoulder and my heart that I would call the role of my dad was suddenly gone, and making sense of that loss was a big thing. Around that time, I'd been training for PANS, which was still scheduled to be in Irvine in March. So the first the biggest tournament I was ever going to do was ripped off the calendar, and jiu-jitsu was potentially going to be gone for the foreseeable future until the pandemic resolved itself. And that was also the year that I turned 30 as well. And I think I'd had a vision for my life of oh yeah, maybe I'll be on Forbes 30 under 30, because that's what I used to define as people like me should be doing, or at the time, because I wasn't married, didn't have kids, didn't have property, all the things that I thought I was supposed to have, and didn't have the director title that I thought I had wanted. All these things I thought I was supposed to have by the time I was 30, that maybe my dad either wanted for me or that I wanted to have so I could tell him, piss off. I didn't have those things. I was living in a rented apartment with a live-in boyfriend my dad didn't know about, because I was afraid to introduce anyone to my dad for fear of disapproval and not supporting. My dad only wanted me to end up with the Jewish doctor or lawyer. My fiance is neither one of those. And yeah, 2020 was a big year of reflection. I competed at PANS in 2020 at Blue Belt, took third, and I remember in the wake of my dad dying and hitting 30, I'm well, what do I want to do? I couldn't really see much of a vision for my career anymore, except, kind of just survive. I knew plenty of people who were getting laid off and in the tech industry, and there was like a corporate restructure at the company where I was working at the time. So I was fairly content of just like, so long as I have a job and I can keep the lights on, pay the bills, like that's fine. That's more than enough. But I had this profound sense of, if I'm doing the same thing, a year from now, 2 years from now, and my life still looks like this, like something is wrong. Like, do I really want to live in Boston and like buy a house here and settle down? Why is jiu-jitsu the only thing that seems like interesting to me, that I care about, competing in, and I care about competing in it? I'm giving so much time to it. What would it, like, have I made a mistake of waking up 30 years old and I might have missed a calling of something I should have discovered much earlier in my life? And can I capitalize on that before it's too late? And probably most of all, which as a writer you can relate to, is like, I can't die and not have, tried my best to publish a book.
Yeah.
That was like, those are like the big existential questions that I had. And then in 2021, packed up the apartment, fiance and our, adopted dog that we'd adopted in the pandemic come with us on this road trip to train and travel across the country. With the goal of, finding a place where we could be happy living, or just go back to Boston and know that we tried something else. For me to, quit my job and try to see, like, could I really hack it at jiu-jitsu, and how far could I go, even though I was on, the wrong side of the adult age group to be, highly competitive, even if at a colored belt rank, and give myself, a chance to have lived an interesting enough experience that could be worth writing down in a book, because my writing has always kind of been best at when it's more like personal narrative and essay, and when I'm writing about myself. Not to say I haven't thought about trying to do a little bit more in fiction, but for whatever reason, like since maybe 2018, or when I started blogging in 2011, 2012, my wheelhouse has always been more writing about myself and my life. So
Yeah.
Why force trying to turn everything into fiction? I did consider that for a while though too. So and then now 2023, it's been 3 years since the reflection, 2 years since that road trip, and the funny thing now is the road trip answered a lot of questions for me of, I'm not going to be able to hang with the kids who've been training since they were 5, who in the same way that I wanted to get into a good college when I was younger, they have the dream of, I want to become a world champion.
Yeah.
Whenever that started for me with my academics and my professional career, it started with them for jiu-jitsu. And it would be crazy for me to think now that I can compete against that unless I had power over the clock and I was willing to give up my whole life again just to train, which I did for a year. And I could feel myself physically breaking down. But yeah, I've got some peace and then some rumblings of unresolved, like, man, I want to stick it to some of the kids, but I can't. I legitimately cannot.
So I've got like 4 things I want to follow up on with you here.
Yeah.
The first is just a personal story. I can empathize with you and your fiance on the meeting of the father thing. I was like head over heels in love with this Israeli girl in college, and we had like a all too brief affair, for lack of a better term, and like I was just totally head over heels for her, and she was like, I want you to meet my parents, but it's just not going to go well. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do about that. And she's like, you could just pretend to be Jewish. And I was like, I don't know the first thing about being Jewish. Like, I had milk every night as a kid with dinner, like I'm about as goyish as it gets. Like, it's just not, like, I hunt deer, there's nothing, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, I'm glad we didn't do that. Her dad, by the way, was a tank commander in the Yom Kippur War, so like a very intimidating man.
Yeah.
It would not have gone well, so I'm glad we didn't try that. But I wanted to ask you, you said, I feel like I have to ask this, in part because you're a woman, but you said that your first school, it was kind of like like a grinder. You were dealing with bigger, heavier, mostly male opponents, and this is a dynamic that we talk about a lot at Princeton because we have a female head instructor, and our culture is very female inclusive and positive because of Emily's experiences as a woman coming up in the sport. And I'm wondering how you feel about that. It sounds like there are some mixed emotions because you're just like one of the most resilient and driven people I've ever met. So like in some ways as an outsider, it seems like you might have fed off that, but then in other ways, like it's undeniable that like you're a woman, these people are bigger, stronger, more hostile. So just talk to me a little bit about like what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say about my first instructor, who I cannot thank enough for what he has done for me, like on and off the mats in my life. And the thing I probably appreciate most about him is I think the no excuses mentality was not a gendered mentality. I'd say he cultivated a culture of just like not quitting when things get hard for anyone on the mat. If anything, I think he was more embarrassed when like the guys would quit because now there's a culture of girls who don't there, at least based on my last visit. So I don't, and I think he did that very well. I mean, I feed off of that, like you said. Maybe I don't think I don't think it's necessarily for everyone. I don't think every gym can be for everyone. The ones that do have managed to block out their schedule or their coaching staff and personnel to really be mindful of like the user needs and priorities by a given time block. I could probably speak more to that based on experience at Otto's headquarters in San Diego, because I think that's one place where they nail it in terms of how to structure their classes for to like fulfill the needs of varying types of jiu-jitsu athletes and hobbyists and whatnot. But it helped that, I guess the question I'll have always is if there hadn't been one upper ranked female who also taught a women's class and who worked the front desk, would my experience, like, would I have felt comfortable signing up? Would I have had a different experience? It's hard for me to say, but Lisa was probably one of my first training partners. She was one of my first teachers. She was a purple belt at the time. I think she's a brown belt now. She was like a piece of the furniture at that gym. She taught, she had like a day job. And then at night she would be working at the gym. And she was, I want to say she competed at like featherweight or light featherweight. She can't be more than like 120, 130 pounds. She looks like an anatomy diagram in a science high school textbook or like a really, this sounds like I'm like objectifying Lisa, but like Lisa's jacked, absolutely jacked. And like I remember when there was still a squat rack or something in the gym, like you could see Lisa just like banging out pull-ups, and there was somebody who was, and like the flash of red hair, super pale, and like when I saw that someone existed like that, like I looked up to her instantly, and it wasn't even just because of rank, but she could hang with all of these guys. And of course now I understand it's like the guys are not going to go 110% on a female for a number of reasons. And it also helped that the main instructor was like a heavyweight, super heavyweight black belt who could beat up everyone in the room at the time. So he could, be an enforcer as well. But yeah, I mean, Lisa being at the front desk certainly didn't hurt. Knowing that she was teaching a class did not hurt. And the women who were there, and there were a few. It wasn't like I was the only girl in a room full of guys. I remember in the white belt class that I started out with, I think the first person I might have drilled with was like a former Patriots cheerleader who looked, she like, the picture of like the all-American girl could like memorize the choreography of jiu-jitsu the way that you would a dance routine. You had her on one hand, you had someone who's now, what does Jill do now? Like works in biotech, like venture capital, and was like a postdoc student at the time. One person who was like going through medical school. I think I had some confidence that I could stick around too, because you had all these people of varying professional and personal backgrounds who could find a common ground in training and make the time for it. And I think that gave me confidence too. Obviously, looking at a bunch of white belts, that's not necessarily a predictor of who's going to stay around. But I think the more that I got to know the other people who were in the room, and either not even like the sacrifices that they were making to come, but like the willingness they had to be consistent, given like regardless of their athletic background or physicality, regardless of what else they were doing, I thought was really cool. And especially as someone who'd always been, whose primary forms of identity is like the people I went to school with and then the people I worked with, to be able to break out of those like resume blocks was really liberating, and that kept me in too.
Yeah. I wanted to try to think of where to go from here. Yeah. I want to circle back to one other thing, and then I kind of want to get more into the aging aspect, as you mentioned, training with the kids, wanting to stick it to them, but kind of like running into the limits of your body. But it seems like in so many ways, jiu-jitsu for you thematically has clarified what you want and who you are. You talk a lot about associating with certain groups and trying to figure out your identity that way, but it seems like jiu-jitsu has had this focusing effect on your identity and also on your desire. So like, what do you want now? Like when you look ahead to a life with your soon-to-be husband and a life on the mats and a life as a writer, like what do you want, and how do you see jiu-jitsu as a part of that holistic picture?
I've reevaluated my why for jiu-jitsu a lot over the years. I'll be the first person to give the advice to a day one white belt of what brought you here is not necessarily what will keep you here. I think somewhere in my storage unit, which is still in Boston, there's a letter I wrote like for the hard days on the mat. I think it's on like a Trader Joe's card that I used to keep in my bag to kind of just like remember why you were here. Hopefully jiu-jitsu will not have to see me through another broken heart. At least not with my soon-to-be husband. But I also think that for as long as I've trained, and even on like the worst days, like last night was not having it, and then I had to go teach. I'm like, I need to pull it together to teach, but I'm so upset. I don't know why I do this. Like, I have no prayer of ever being as good as I really want to be. But I think the truth is the problems that I've always had off the mat have been solved by the problems I face off the mat are either solved by the mat or continue to surface on the mat until I solve them. Whether it's a concept of I'm overanalyzing, or I'm hesitating, or I'm concerned about going after something full force. The problems that I observe in my personal life are things that I can resolve. If I can figure it out in jiu-jitsu, I can figure it out elsewhere. Yeah. And I think that is the kind of consistent thread in what will keep me in the sport. Or even if I have to, scale down my efforts as time goes on, even as I have to, prioritize becoming a mother, as, that window is, approaching for me. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big question of, I think it has confirmed certain parts of my identity. It makes very clear what I still need to work on. I think what is attractive to me is that both attractive and frustrating and essential is that you are never done, but it's also kind of a thrill that you can never be done. You can always learn more. You can always study more, even when you get to black belt, as you will be able to speak to very soon. It's just, you've checked, the milestone box, but you're in a whole new ocean of other people who've reached that milestone, and there's as much range there as there was in every other belt and every other part of the journey. And I don't know, when I think about kind of my professional identity too, like jiu-jitsu's given me the confidence that I can stick with something and I won't quit when it gets hard. There are other things where I wanted to like give up or felt like I couldn't. I think I can think back to parts of my life where it's like I didn't work hard enough to continue, or if only I'd stuck with it, whether it was with a food business or with the podcast I was doing back in 2016 of I could have really been great at this, or at least I could have been very good if I just stuck with it. I don't want to have to say that about jiu-jitsu or my writing. And I think jiu-jitsu and writing both kind of remind me that so long as I keep going, that is better than a pause or a stop. And that's kind of a lesson that I hope to, bring into my marriage, bring into, raising a family, bring into anyone that I might teach in jiu-jitsu in the future, and into my career. Though I know, it doesn't get easier as you get older. You just have to get better at managing the things you can control and prioritizing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, your point about it never ending. I almost see that as a relief. I think about, I still have not watched the entire last season of Mad Men because I just love Don Draper so much, and I just can't bring myself to learn of his fate. I'm having the same thing going on with Peaky Blinders right now. And there are so many novels where I've read them over and over again, but the ending is the hardest part for me because of the finality of it. And I think that's the great relief that's inherent in jiu-jitsu, is that it really doesn't end. It just kind of keeps starting over every day. Every belt is really not an accurate statement. It starts over every day. It starts over every round. That's always been a big thing of what's attracted me to it is it's just not a finite thing.
I can tell you, if you do ever watch the ending of Mad Men, it will still feel like it hasn't ended. So don't let that stop you.
So several people have told me that, but I just can't bring myself to do it. And part of it is I was watching that show. You were talking about your tumultuous college years. That was a show that kind of helped me make sense of that time in my life and kind of gave me a window into I know it's drama, but what life could look like if I didn't live an examined life.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to go back there,
And
Don Draper is kind of a symbol of that for me.
We could do a whole other podcast about that. And I work at a creative agency that's within a conglomerate similar to some of the ones that are in Mad Men, and let me tell you, some things haven't changed over the last 60 years.
Yeah. I feel like the newspaper industry when I was in it had some of that, but a lot of the glamour and the romance was dead with just the financial reality of the industry, but the dysfunction was still there. And I think that I could have continued to go down that road, and I probably would be a lot heavier and have less of a functioning liver at this point in my life at 36, and probably just miserable. Now, who knows if I would have met my wife. I mean, we both worked at the paper together, but I'm glad things didn't go that way. But I want to talk about, on the subject of being heavier and not having a functioning liver, let's talk about being the old but not quite so old people on the mat. Because I find that now I'm kind of on the older side of the spectrum, and I'll roll with somebody and I'll be able to control them. Maybe they're a purple belt or a blue belt, but I have a hard time. And then I ask them oh, how old are you? And I'm oh, this kid is literally, I'm old enough to be his father. And there's just only so much I can do as I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not particularly athletically gifted. I don't even think I'm particularly good at jiu-jitsu. I just like it. There's only so much I can do to deal with the strength and endurance of somebody who's that age. And it goes back to this point that you made earlier about realized and unrealized potential. This person has their whole life ahead of them, and they're going for it. They want to realize that potential. It's not my life is over. I plan on being here a very long time, but my potential realization window is closing, at least in a pure athletic domain. I think in the self-actualization domain, it just keeps getting, the potential keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. but like it's just hard to escape the fact that like we do a martial art, this is a combat sport, and these fucking young people
Yep.
they're so much stronger and they can just go forever, and it's like, what do you do with that? How do you train intelligently and at the same time, because you and I are both doing Masters Worlds, we both want to go out there and win, like where do you strike the balance?
Well, I can think about the balance piece, but first, what I like to tell myself when I am suffering with the 12 to 13-year-old girl who's probably going to wreck her division at Pan's Kids and is probably going to be humiliating me far worse even than she is now, is no one else that I'm going against is going to come at me as hard, as scrappy, as flexible, and as fearless as that girl is. So that's the attitude I try to take when I'm coming in on a good day of like, even if she totally beats me, even if she triangles me 100 times or takes my back or steps out of my guard in a certain way, this gets to be a learning opportunity and a tool for me too, just to keep coming and remember that my 30 to 35-year-old female opponent, no matter how long she's been training, is not like this scrappy 12 to 13-year-old who wants to do ADCC trials potentially in the next 2 years. So perspective helps for one. I think the other thing that I keep in mind a lot is the concept of trying to master or at least nail the unsexy basics of things. Mind you, like I should really be doing more mobility work and like flexibility work. That's to improve for sure. But like I invest in doing the cardio. I invest in doing enough strength training to minimize my risk of injury, which injuries still happen. That same 13-year-old like passed in a way I didn't expect, and like my ankle's a little bit sore 2 weeks later. But taking fewer shortcuts, because I know that I'm only going to be able to recover so much if I'm not getting a full night of sleep, if I'm not making sure that my hydration is up to par, especially in Georgia summer where I walk outside to walk the dogs for a half hour before training. It's like, it's basically the equivalent of a sauna for the next few months. So I think taking fewer shortcuts, or if I've had a bad day of training because I'm getting beaten up by the kids, it's like, well, did you drink enough water during the day? Or, hey, if you did the cardio earlier, that's going to, serve you well against, others when you go to Masters Worlds. But realistically, you're coming in to training having already trained today. If you've put in a full cardio effort for 45 minutes to, 90 minutes. Even if it's low impact steady state, like it's still work, like you're still putting your system under stress. So I think the trickiest thing is finding other kind of like-minded people who still want to commit at a certain like competitive intensity. And mind you, like my values will probably change in the next 3 years.
Yeah,
where
they will, especially if you have children, trust me.
Yeah. So part of me is like this is a bit of my last dance in some ways of my body's going to go over to fulfill a different purpose in the primary order first.
Well, see, you say that, and I know like it's different for women, right? Because you actually have to carry this child and birth it. But like your life changes, especially your life as a grappler, as a competitor changes, but it's not over. It really just begins again. And like my wife doesn't train jiu-jitsu, but I can kind of use her as like a training example. She's really strong and she lifts like really heavy, and she's gotten stronger since having her son. Like their mom strength is like a real thing.
Yeah.
So it just hold that notion loosely, because I think you're going to be surprised. And I think a lot of women who have given birth would say the same thing. Like I've certainly observed the same dynamic in Emily. Like every time Emily has a child, she just comes back like even more intense and intimidating and fearless and elite.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to sit down with Emily once, and yeah, she's a BAMF. She, like, her mere existence does things for the sport that would not have been fathomable, I think, when she started. And women's jiu-jitsu world's extremely lucky to have someone like her to, you know, be a strong role model and example, not only from like an accomplishments and like what she has done, but in how she's able to think, write, and talk about it. I think she's truly one of a kind, and definitely one of the first few people really whose writing like really inspired me in the sport.
That's really cool.
Whether she knows that or not, I think I was very awkward the day that I interviewed her back in 2021 in September, when I like came home after like midway through the road trip to go to a family wedding, and then I went up to Boston, got my purple belt. So I think when I talked to her, like coming home for the first time and like right before a major promotion, like that conversation stuck with me pretty deeply.
That's beautiful. Well, she'll certainly know it now. I'll make sure she at least watches back the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, just maybe not take my the beer recommendation that I helped her with that day. She was hosting, I think, a birthday party for her husband, and I had gone with the only beer recommendation I knew. I don't drink beer, a beer that my fiance likes, and I had asked her later, like, how did they like the beer? And she said it was very polarizing. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, so Emily doesn't. I don't think I've ever seen Emily drink beer. So I you know, Emily's great at a lot of things, but I would question her beer taste.
Yeah, so Emily Kwok, if you're listening to this, sorry about the dogfish head. Something 90.
Oh, 90 minute.
90, I don't remember. It was a very particular type of dogfish head.
It's going to be a very bitter IPA.
It was very polarizing.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, your point about like framing each round. It seems to me like when you look at these rounds with these younger people and you're coming away, and let's say you didn't have the outcome you wanted, you're banking like the psychological inertia, which is not something that I do, and I'm like, maybe I should steal that from her. That sounds like a really good tactic.
Yeah, this is something that I had been like meaning to do for years and have started to do now, of like trying to find like make it somewhat less awkward for me to film my own rounds so I can watch it back. I hate doing it. I hate watching it. I hate being the person who's like whipping out the GoPro and then praying that nobody walks in front of it in between classes. But I think looking back at the tape and how just people move, whether like older or younger, like the movement is not the same. And in some cases, like I don't trust my memory to remember a round as it actually happened. So having that as a resource too, to kind of just study, the kids will tend to be in a little bit more of a tunnel vision sometimes than the adults, because of whether there's a recency bias to what they learned during the week, or, you know, they're getting close to the competition, they're just trying to spam like their A sequence. It's helpful to just like watch the tape back. I think that's not necessarily specific to the kids, but I've started to do that, and well, we'll see 6 months from now if it's really how the extent to which that's paid off. I don't think it's going to be an overnight effect, but
yeah, there's an art to reviewing footage, and I'm with you. Like, it's something I've just started doing with some regularity, and I hate it just as much as you do. And like, so I will do it every Saturday during open mat, because the open mat follows my class. So I'm like, I feel less weird about handpicking my training partners and recording in that context. But yeah, like it just feels strange. And it also, like, from a pure artistic standpoint, it kind of like diminishes like the beauty for me, because nothing compares to being in that moment and feeling it, and just everything feels so fluid, and you know, you're in a flow state, and then you watch it and you're like, what is this? It just looks terrible.
Who's this flopping fish?
Yeah, like it looks slow, and you're like, oh man, you should have transitioned like 5 times already. And it's but like getting over that, I think, is if like mastery is your priority, and I'm saying this to myself as much as I'm saying this to you, I'm not preaching at you, this is kind of like me telling myself this, but like if mastery is the priority, I have to get over that. You know, that's the feedback loop, one of the feedback loops that I need to be successful. It's a bitter pill to swallow.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly important, I think, for me at the gym that I train at now, where I'm not a homegrown student. I think that if I'd never left my original gym, I think I would have been able to ask my initial instructor for like support, feedback, and he would have all the data of who I had been up until that point, because I was basically raised there, I think. And that was a gym largely working professionals, Metro Boston, people come and people go. The culture of the gym I'm at now, which is in suburban Atlanta, I mean, I think the coach's main priority is to, you know, have the next gen kids team that is going to be a feeder, you know, for future world champions, kind of based in the southeastern United States. And maybe this is just my perception coming into Pan's Kids, but like, I don't expect my instructor to be able to, you know, give me the coaching and do all of my work for me, especially at a time like this. Like, will I get some additional help ahead of Masters Worlds? Can I book a private? Like, yes, 100%. Talked about that. But I think it becomes even more important where I think the tendency of, you know, older people, whether it's coaches or in general, is to like invest in the kids as the next generation, you know, on the mats or off the mats. Like, you're going to be inclined to help somebody younger and to teach the kids. It's hard to get that same kind of investment when you're older, unless you already have a pre-existing relationship or someone has chosen to like mentor you or you've reached out to them as like a sponsor when I think of professional capacity.
Yeah.
So I feel like the tape watching exercise or doing whatever I can off the mat. And some of this is part of where I train now. Some of this is just part of growing up, is taking that responsibility onto myself instead of expecting a coach to be able to solve that for me, and being really strategic when I do ask for a coach's help that like I'm going to make the very most of it, because the attention is probably going to go more towards the kids or the people who are trying to make a career out of it, which makes total sense.
I think what you're talking about, it's just a natural evolution in pretty much every sport I've played in, but this is kind of like the sport I've done longest, most consistent. And you just, it's not so much that you outgrow your coach, it's just that you get to a certain level of technical proficiency where you can self-coach a bit more, and then coaches kind of, this sounds shittier than I actually mean it, but like coaches kind of become like tools in your toolkit, right? So like you go to this coach for something, you go to that coach for something else, and you have maybe one coach, like Emily is the person I go to. She has the, you know, the 30,000 foot view that I rely on. But you really kind of start to self-author your jiu-jitsu, and that I think really starts to take off at purple belt. So it's a fine line to walk, because I see some athletes like start to do what you're doing at blue belt, or like maybe they're like a 3 or 4 stripe white belt, and it's like, you know, you kind of, it's a little bit premature. I like your spirit, but like your coach does know what they're talking about. You should probably learn how to shrimp, like stuff like that. But eventually, yeah, you get to a point where you know what your North Star is as a grappler, as a human being, and no one's going to know that better than you. And it's kind of like pulling all the appropriate pieces in around that North Star to navigate on your own. Yeah, it's knowing yourself well enough to know what your North Star is, and then knowing yourself well enough to know, like, okay, I need more external input or I need less external input. It's a very kind of tricky dance we have to do.
Yeah, I think I did not have the self-awareness of blue belt to know how bad I was. Now, at brown belt, I think I have a lot more of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, kudos to those blue belts who are able to self-author in a way that
I don't think they
certainly
are.
could not.
This is something that Emily and one of our students, Kevin, talked about on like a BJJ mental models series we're doing, and it's kind of like, well, what is the necessity of a coach in the instructional era? And I think the coach is to kind of close that self-awareness gap. And there's very like undergraduate tendency to be like, well, you know, and I think this is just like a undergraduate postmodern tendency of like, well, if everything's right, then nothing's wrong, so screw it. Like, I'm not going to do this. This doesn't make any sense. Like, why do I need to learn how to write a 5-paragraph essay if form is totally useless and bullshit? And like, they don't realize that there's a progression you have to go through in order to transcend form. And I think anyone at blue belt who's trying to transcend form probably hasn't studied form enough to transcend form yet. And man, it's paradoxical, but like, paradox is the nature of the universe. What are you going to do?
Yeah. My first coach always used to get hung up on the fact of, I want to teach principles, but in order to teach principles, I have to teach techniques. Yep. And the mistake that people make is that, jiu-jitsu is just like a bunch of techniques. It's really not. But I've yet to figure out a better way to teach the principle underlying the technique without initially exposing people to a certain number of techniques. And at my first gym, there was a test from white to blue. And then I don't think there's as much of a testing protocol after that. But yeah, I'd say white belt to blue belt, you had to just know a certain number of techniques. You weren't, and understand how to apply them, or just be able to do them, not necessarily with any understanding. That's, I think, the hard part of, I would argue I did not really understand anything about jiu-jitsu in a meaningful way until the last year, when I had enough exposure to both like more the traditional game and more of the modern game to fully balance out my understanding of what worked and why. And even still, it is a mystery, especially as no-gi and gi diverge more. And I feel like that's a different conversation of, even if the principles are the same, you add in the rule sets, you add in the circumstances associated with a gi versus a no-gi game and metagame. Like, as we talked about earlier, it's all endless.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So I kind of want to close with one subject, and that's Masters Worlds. Like, we're both going into this thing in less than, I think we're like, we 6 weeks out now?
Yep.
5 weeks out. What is your current training camp revealing to you? And I don't mean in the sense that, like, I need to work on De La Riva more.
Yeah.
I just, as a human, what are you learning about yourself right now?
So it's funny. I have my training journal from when I was going through camp last year here, and now I'm like starting up a new one because I reached the end of this one a few days ago. I'd say what it revealed to me is I didn't know shit last year, and I still did pretty well. So if I can go into that, I have every reason to believe that I actually have a clue now, or more than I did last year. And if I can believe in my trajectory of improvement day in, day out through this camp, that I have reason to believe that I can succeed. Because the questions I was asking last year, like, some of them I'm like, yep, that still gives me trouble. But I see these notes and impressions of what's happening in training and what do I do in this situation. And I look at those now, I'm like, oh no, I know what to do here. Or, oh hey, that doesn't give me trouble anymore. So what I'm kind of bringing into this camp, at least 6 weeks out, you ask me this question another, 1 month out, 1 week out, the answer might change. But in light of looking at my training log from around this time last year, it's, hey, I have learned something. Even though I had like an injury in the winter, even though I'm getting beaten up by the kids and the kids just seem to be accelerating exponentially every day, I've already won in terms of improving myself relative to this time last year. And I have reason to believe I can keep improving and perform. That's kind of where I'm at.
Have you always been so confident?
No, I would argue I'm not confident. It's a bit of a fake it till you make it. And I don't know, another thing that I think about, at least with jiu-jitsu, is a lot of the people I started with have not continued. And I am willing just to be, the most stubborn motherfucker, win or lose, that at a certain point, it's not a matter of who's good, it's who's left. And if I'm not good, I'm willing to be one of the ones who's left. So I have confidence at least in that, even if it's not in my own abilities or athletic gifts, because Lord knows I'm not a particularly athletic specimen relative to most people I've even seen in my division. So that's it was not always that way. I cry a lot. I'm a big crier. Still am. But
maybe confidence is the wrong word. Maybe it's conviction, because I think conviction is deeper. Conviction is like a soulful level type thing, and I get a ton of conviction from you. And I think it comes from a place of someone who's done the work, someone who's been in the arena, in the fire over and over again, someone who has transcended some really heavy shit in their life. And yeah, it's admirable, Erica. You're a beautiful human being, and I hope you kick some ass out there. I'm looking forward to going onto the mats with you in Vegas. We'll see what happens.
Thank you. Yeah, conviction feels like the right word.
Yeah.
For what you just described, and if I had to say it's something I go for or strive for, conviction and commitment. True on the mats, true in the marriage I'm about to enter, true in my writing, and all walks and facets of my life right now.
So, Erica, where can people find you? I mean, you have an amazing Substack, you have an amazing newsletter separate from Substack, you have your Instagram, two Instagram accounts. Like, give people the rundown here. I'll put everything in the show notes, so the links are all there. But like, I would highly recommend that everybody get on her Substack and get on her newsletter, because they're great.
So yeah, it's a very timely question. That answer will probably change in the next month. I'd say people should prioritize the Substack. My Substack handle is the Submission Artist, kind of a play on both grappling and writing. I try to write like one or two good long form pieces once or twice a month on Substack. I currently keep a separate newsletter that I'm probably going to migrate into Substack because I looked at my own landing page of content. I'm like, if I can't understand this, no one else is going to.
Hey,
so
I understand it. I just want to make sure people know where to get the full Erica experience. That's all.
Yeah. You can check on my Instagram for either my writing or my personal Instagram account. The link in bio is a kind of landing page of recent writing archives. There's no great wayfinding technique. It's something I'm working on. I do this for a living, but I'm bad at doing it for my own work.
I have the same freaking problem.
I'd say if you look me up, if you go to erica-zendell.com, that's probably like my main portfolio with selections of writing. My Substack, The Submission Artist, I will probably be continuing to write at Zen and the Art of Fighting, which is a mouthful. That's the writing Instagram. Zendell E for the personal one. I'd say if you follow me on one of those places, stay tuned for a platform consolidation so that you can find a bit of a more one-stop shop for my work. I also write for Flow Grappling, but you can search my matches on Flow Grappling. You can't really search my articles, which is a flaw in their content management system. So, oh gosh, I did not give a particularly succinct answer to that.
It's okay.
Yeah.
The links will be in the show notes. That's why we have show notes.
Yeah, I've been on too many platforms. Like, there's old Medium stuff. There's stuff on Blogger.
Same. Yeah.
I can't get on more social media at this point. I'm not into Threads. Threads is probably where I should be. But
I've published a couple threads. I just think I'm just too old. I'm just too old. I'm just a long form guy, and that's just how it's going to be. I was thinking about, we're both from New Jersey, and I was trying to think about, like, how do we explain, because you and I probably grew up like 30 minutes apart, but we really grew up in like two different worlds. And I was thinking about the best way to explain the worlds that we grew up in. And I was like, Erica grew up in heroin and BMW world, and I grew up in heroin and pickup trucks world. That's the best I could do. So if you want to understand New Jersey, particularly like the social strata of northern New Jersey, that's the best I can come up with right now.
Yeah, and I think it is further complicated by the fact that most of my family is like down by the shore, and I was technically born in Long Branch, and my sense of identity is more Boardwalk and Bruce Springsteen than heroin and BMWs. So
it's even more complicated, yeah.
I mean, that's where my mom's side of the family is, and my dad was born and raised in Patterson, so
yeah, that's where my family came from too. They were all like Irish silk factory workers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that contributes to some of the jiu-jitsu appeal too. The only the strong survive, Jersey, very trite but very true. You got to be tough in the Garden State because everyone's just kind of
It's a thing, people.
Shitting on you.
I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Like, not everybody can make it here. So, sorry.
Little state, big personality.
Yeah. I guess I should talk about the stuff I talk about at the end of every episode.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about what you've learned about yourself in your Masters Worlds camp, though, too.
Oh, sure. What have I learned? I feel like, Erica, like a lot of what I've been learning since I competed last, and really what I've been learning for the past almost 2 years of being a dad, because my son's going to be 2 on August 6th, is just like how to love and accept myself. Because I feel like so much of what attracted me to jiu-jitsu was, it's a beautiful art. Like, are you familiar with the Rilke poem? I forget the title of it, but it's like this. He's looking at this bust of Apollo, and it ends with like, "You must change your life." That always stuck with me, and I've always felt that attraction to jiu-jitsu. Like, I'm gazing at this beautiful work of art, and every time I look at it, it's like I'm looking at it at the first time, but that refrain is there over and over and over again. Like, you must change your life. And that reorganization of my life just continues to happen the deeper I go down this jiu-jitsu rabbit hole. And in a lot of ways, when my son was born, when I got married is when I started training jiu-jitsu. And I don't think that thematically that's accidental. That was a big evolution and a growth stage in my life. And then I think evolution 2 happened when my son was born. And every time I look at my son, I have the same feeling of like, you must change your life. Like, you have to be a person who is worthy of this gift. You have to be a person who can love this child unconditionally, who can lead him, who can support him. And I think that a lot of that work stems from like learning to love myself. And that's a whole separate conversation of where that comes from. But, a lot of that is tied up in some like childhood trauma that I've been processing for the past 2 years with like a really great therapist. But, I went into this most recent competition, and empirically, like, I performed. I didn't win, but I went out and I got more useful information out of it than I ever did before. I was more poised and relaxed than I've ever been, and like I came away from it losing 2 matches, but not feeling like a loser at all. Just feeling like I had this amazing gift of knowledge that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. That's only going to make me better going into Masters Worlds, and it all comes from this place of like not being extrinsically motivated about my fighting or my jiu-jitsu or my writing or about anything, truthfully. And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road in my current training camp, is just being present to what's happening, loving what's happening regardless of whether it's quote unquote good or bad, and just like being okay with myself through the whole thing. And like there's another layer of challenge heaped on top of this, because I'm getting my black belt on Saturday, and then like 5 weeks later I'm going to walk onto the mat at Masters Worlds and fight people who might have been black belts for as long as I've been training. I don't know who the fuck I'm going to run into, and I don't know how much better, how much worse they're going to be, but I do know that I can take this feeling of radical self-acceptance in ease and bring it to bear in that situation. And that's because of this training camp, and that's really because of everything I've been doing in the past 2 years. So it's really like, as much as it's an 8-week training camp, it's really been like a 2-year training camp to get ready for this. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where I'm at with that at the moment.
Yeah, it does. When I think about my either camp or just my performance last year, what I most remember was I didn't just bring, the previous 8 weeks or, 12 weeks into the mat. I brought everything that I had into that moment, down to what I packed in my bag, to the decisions that had led me to that point in my life to decide, hey, I'm going to do this tournament. I'm going to get a job again so I can afford to compete. There was a lot of sacrifice that had already been made by the time I stepped on. And I was like, no matter what happens, even if I lose, I haven't lost. I've already won.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing where like no one can take that away from you. No one can even touch that if they wanted to. And your example of like banking that psychological inertia of going against these younger people, and regardless of outcome, like you have that win and nobody's going to come at you that hard. This is like, in my mind, like the meta psychological inertia. It's like, I've been through all this shit. You people have no idea. Like, you literally you can't touch me because I've already been in the worst of it. And yeah, no one can take that away from you, that the strength that comes from coming out on the other side of that stuff.
That's where the conviction comes from.
Yep. This has been a great conversation, Erica. I'm glad we finally did this. Hopefully we can do it again sometime down the road. And just thank you. Thank you for being the very first guest on this podcast. It's been a solo cast up until this point.
I hope I've set the bar appropriately high. Not too high, just high enough.
You have.
All right, awesome.
So yeah, if you want to support BJJ Meditations or read any of the essays that typically underpin these episodes, you can do so on Mirror. The link is in the show notes. You want to support the podcast, you can buy an NFT of any of those episodes, because I'm a weird crypto guy. Not really. I'm kind of like crypto agnostic. It's like, to me, it's like a little bit better than buying a lottery ticket, and I like the technology. Like, guys, like I still have a 401k, like I'm not fully vested in crypto, but the blockchain technology is especially cool if you're a writer. But eventually, like you, Erica, I'm in this consolidation practice right now, and eventually it's going to be like something that normal people, if they actually want to support the podcast, they can. So just the crypto freaks. But Pat, if you're out there, thank you for buying 2 NFTs. The other thing you can do is just like, subscribe, review, share the podcast wherever you consume it. Follow on Instagram. You can work with me as a consultant, dovetailing off my work with Emily Kwok and Josh Waitskin. That's really what this is all about. Is I just want to share what I've learned over the past 6 years of doing this, and show you how it relates directly and is fed by jiu-jitsu. Erica, Erica and I have not worked together in any formal capacity. We're just colleagues, writers and grapplers, but like, as you can see, Erica puts a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about into practice on this podcast, and the results speak for themselves, folks. So if nothing else, just take what we talk about today and use it, because it can transform you. You can follow BJJ Meditations on Instagram, read me on Substack, and of course come train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Erica, next time you're in New Jersey, please swing through. And my wife's actually from Kennesaw, and we go to see her parents a lot. So next time I'm in Kennesaw, I'm going to swing through and drop in at your school, if that's okay. I don't know what your policy is, but
yep, I think it's just a mat fee.
Yeah.
You would be more than welcome, and you might not even have to pay that.
I would love to come and train and see the place. So, and obviously would love to see you next time you're in Princeton again. Come through.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.